Philippines, hello Region 1, aloha sa Caribbean learners, airing live from the Mango capital of the Philippines and Carlos City. You're tuning into CCN Broadcast Center, a virtual home of every SDO-SEC learner, where passion is the key, learning paves the way. With our division mantra, developing creativity, maximizing versatility. This is your CCN Broadcast Center. CCN Broadcast Center, a virtual home of every SDO-SEC learner.
Good day, learners! Welcome to Carlos and Caroline Network, featuring disaster readiness and risk reduction, where you can find joy and excitement while learning. Just be relaxed and enjoy our episode. Please get ready with your ballpen, paper, and module. So let us start. Disasters from different perspective. Module 3. Quarter 3, Module 4 of Disaster Readiness and Risk Reduction, Senior High School. I am your teacher for today, Mr. Jeffrey A. Tamayo, at your service. So let us start. So this lesson focuses on the most essential learning competencies, analyze disaster from the different perspectives: physical, psychological, sociocultural, economic, political, and biological, with a code DRRR 11/12-1A-B-6. This lesson focuses also to identify the different perspectives on disaster, explain the different disasters perspective, formulate helpful methods to face different disasters, and finally, manifest readiness to face the possible disasters. Are you now ready? So before that, let us take the pretest. We will check the prior knowledge about disasters from different perspectives. Choose your answer from the box and use a clean sheet of paper for your answer. Number 1. Perspective of a disaster that shows how the government assesses, manages, and mitigates the effects of disaster. Choose from the box. Your time starts now. If your answer is economic, then you are right. Next. It is not an example of psychological effect of a disaster. Choose from the box. Your time starts now. If your answer is hunger, then you are correct. Very good, learners. Let us proceed to number 3. Perspective of a disaster that stresses on the significance of culture in developing the disaster-resilient personality among the inhabitants in a certain community. If your answer is sociocultural, then you are correct. Very good, learners. Number 4. It is an example of the physical effects of a disaster. Choose from the box. Alright, so our answer should be injuries. Correct. And last, number 5. The perspectives of disaster that is normally left untreated. Your time starts now. Okay, learners, if your answer is psychological, you are correct. Congratulations! I hope you are now ready for the lesson. Let us continue by doing activity. Think about the scenario below. Write yes if it is a disaster and no if it is not. Write your answer on a paper. Again, you are going to analyze the given scenario. Number 1, a landslide in a mountain resort. It is a disaster or not? The answer is yes, it is a disaster. Number 2, a typhoon traversing a remote and uninhabited island. The answer is no, because whether it is a super typhoon traversing a remote and uninhabited island, there is no disaster. Next, number 3, a volcano erupting 15 kilometers away from a city. Is it a disaster or not? Okay, we will answer it. If your answer is yes, then you are correct, because a volcano erupting 15 kilometers away from a city will affect the people in that certain community. Number 4, a mudslide towards a hillfoot community. If your answer is yes, you are correct, because there is termed community being affected by a certain hazard. And number 5, a strong earthquake in the city proper of Calamba. Your time starts now. Okay, if your answer is yes, then you are correct, because there is an attack to a certain community in the Calamba. Therefore, if we encounter such disaster, each individual must be aware of the effects of such disaster, because we cannot stop natural disasters, but we can arm ourselves with knowledge so that many lives wouldn't have to be lost if there was enough disaster preparedness. Thank you. Let's move on to the next activity, classifying me. Classify the effects of disaster on its correct perspectives. Number 1, damage in infrastructure. 2, helplessness. Unemployment. COVID-19 pandemic. Loss of crops. Physical disabilities or illness. Low level of trust in public institutions. Disruption of social relationship. In other words, you are going to classify those effects of disaster on its correct perspective. You are going to use the table that is being shown on the screen for your answer, and I will be giving you a minute to do the activity. Okay, so I hope you are now working. You are just going to classify the different effects of disaster on its correct perspectives. "30 seconds left. You can do it, learners. Okay, 20 seconds. Five, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So I hope you already classified the effects of disaster on its correct perspective. So let us know the correct answer in classifying the effects of disasters. So if your answer for physical, we have the damage in infrastructure and physical disabilities or illness. For For biological, we have the COVID-19 pandemic that we are experiencing. To psychological, helplessness. To social-cultural, we have disruption of social relationships. We have the economic, you have there the unemployment and loss of crops. And if we speak about political, the low level of trust in public institutions. If you are got it right, then you are very good learners. Now, let us move on to the discussion of the disasters from different perspectives. So, we will be discussing, as I have said, the different perspectives of disaster. Number one, we have the physical perspective. Calamities are phenomena that can cause great physical damage in a community. Infrastructure, it's people and their properties. For example, we have the houses and environmental sources of living. Natural disasters generally affect the physical infrastructural facilities, agricultural productivity, and even lead to loss of life and cause damage to property. When we say physical perspective, there is a damage in community infrastructure and people and to their properties. So what are the effects of different perspective of disaster when it comes to physical perspective? Number one, we have injury. The second, we have the physical disability or illness. Number three, sanitation. And number four, damage in infrastructure. As we all know that if we encounter disaster, for instance, we have the earthquake, there is a collapse of buildings, destroyed roads and bridges. So those are the examples of physical perspective and its effect to disaster. The second one would be the psychological perspective. Disasters are mostly unpredictable, right? Yes, which leave the victims in a state of shock. They tend to deny loss and try to escape from reality. Being in denial state makes the victims more vulnerable to stress, anxiety, and other different maladaptive reactions. What are the effects of disaster? The psychological, we have distress, we have hopelessness, we have hatred or revenge, cognitive effects, insecurities, isolation, helplessness, and lack of trust. In other words, when we speak about psychological perspectives, the victim is in a state of shock affecting its psychological perspective in life. Moving on, number three is the socio-cultural perspective. Filipinos are generally known as matiisin, resourceful, helpful, optimistic, and prayerful. These traits help a lot of Filipinos to survive the challenge of COVID-19 in the country. As we all know, we are experiencing the COVID-19, right? Okay, and it will affect the socio-cultural perspective. Their belief was that help from someone or from God would arrive at a time they most needed. It also helps most people to survive a lot of oddities in life. When we speak about socio-cultural effects of disasters, it focuses on the change in individual roles. For example, in your family members, your dad is already died, and your mother will take place that role of being the head of the family. So there is a change in role. The second one is the disruption of social relationship and personal connections. As we all know, in the COVID-19 pandemic that we are experiencing, we have wearing of face masks, we have social distancing, right? So this disaster can disrupt our social relationship and personal connections. Number four, the economic perspective. Disasters affect the economic condition of a community because they reduce local and international trade. It can also partially or totally paralyze a country's transportation system, just like what had happened in the COVID-19 pandemic, in where there is an effect to our trade, whether it is locally or internationally. So the effects of disaster when it comes to economic, it is the loss of life. We have the unemployment, in where it is very evident that most of the Filipino people are now unemployed. The loss of property, the loss of household articles, the loss of crops, or even the loss of public infrastructures. So it can really affect the economic condition of a certain area experiencing such disaster. And number 5, we have the political perspective. Agencies of the government have a significant role to play in directing disaster preparedness, prevention, and recovery. Social systems establish vulnerability to natural disasters, and governments are often considered to be responsible for disaster effects. We have the PDRRMO, we have the CDRRMO. Those are the offices who is directing disaster preparedness, prevention, and recovery. They are the one helping people to be prepared to prevent and recover as we experience such disaster. How about the effects of disaster when it comes to political? People who have trust in the political institution will assess the government's risk assessments. Low level of trust in the public institutions, therefore, it means that citizens may ignore the recommendations. For number 6, we have the biological perspective. The disturbing effects caused by a prevalent kind of disease or virus is an epidemic or pandemic level is known as biological disaster. Take note, if there is epidemic or pandemic, the perspective being affected is in biological. So biological effects of disaster, as I've said earlier, we have number 1, the epidemic level, which is biological disaster affects large numbers of people within a given community or an area. For example, we have the dengue. So when we speak about the epidemic level, disaster affects large numbers of people within a given community. However, when we speak about the pandemic level, it talks about biological disaster affects a much larger region, sometimes spanning entire continents or even the globe. So, let us move on. Those are the different perspectives of disaster. Now, the next activity would be the concept map. You are going to complete the concept map below, as you can see on your screen. So, as I've said, we have the different perspective of disaster, the physical, biological, psychological, sociocultural, economic, and political. So what are you going to do? You are just going to write the effects of that disaster to physical, specifically physical and other perspective of disaster. So I'll be giving you a minute to do the activity. Okay, so I'll repeat. By completing the concept map, you are going to write the effects on the different perspective of disaster. I believe you are writing the best effect to the perspective of disaster. 30 seconds left. Fifteen seconds. 4, 3, 2, and 1. Your time is up, learners. I believe you completed all the needed informations on your concept map. Now, let us check. Okay, so you have there on your screen the different perspective. If your answer in physical, we have the injuries, we have the physical disabilities or illness, and we have sanitation. Next would be the biological. We have the pandemic and we have the epidemic. In psychological, we have its effects, hatred, revenge, insecurities, isolation, damage in infrastructure, hopelessness, cognitive effects, helplessness, lack of trust. Next would be on social cultural. Its effect, change in individual roles, disruption of social relationship and personal connections. For economic, we have the loss of property, the loss of life, the loss of crops, unemployment, loss of household articles, and loss of public infrastructures. And the last one, we have in political, the effects would be the low level of trust in public institutions. If you are got it right, okay, you are very good learners. So you can screenshot our screen so you have your notes. Okay, that's all for the different perspective of disaster. Let us now check your understanding by choosing the letter of the correct answer. Please prepare again your ball pen and your paper so that you're going to answer the questions. Number 1, a perspective that stresses on the significance of culture in developing a disaster-resilient personality among the inhabitants in a certain community is called blank. Letter A, biological. B, sociocultural. C, physical. Or D, political. I will give you 5 seconds for your answer. Okay, so if your answer is letter B, sociocultural, you are right. Next, number 2. A situation such as an incident or natural disaster that causes significant damage to the public is called blank. A, demonstration. B, disaster. C, pollution. Or D, war. 5 seconds for your answer. Okay, if your answer is letter B, disaster, you are correct. Number 3. The following are examples of physical effects of disaster, except blank. Choose your answer. Letter A, injuries. B, physical disability. C, sanitation. Or D, unemployment. Your time starts now. Okay, so the answer is letter D, unemployment. Number 4, great damage from a disaster could be prevented through blank. Letter A, accurate assessment and preparations. B, strong implementation of rules. C, rigid information campaign. And letter D, sufficient funding. Choose your answer in 5 seconds. Okay, so what is your answer? If your answer is letter A, you are right. The accurate assessment and preparations when it comes to great damage of a disaster. Number 5, the following are examples of psychological effect of a disaster, except blank. What is it? Letter A, anxiety. B, bereavement. C, depression. Or D, hunger. Okay, so the answer in number 5 is hunger. You are right. So if you got all the correct answer, you are very good learners. Congratulations. Now, let us proceed to your assignment. Please take note of this. What do you think? Society and most of all schools have a great moral responsibility to establish a safe environment for students and their teachers. The greater the level of education, awareness, and self-organization, the greater its potential to avoid or mitigate the negative consequences of natural or man-made disasters. So what are you going to do in this task? You are going to identify possible disasters that could possibly affect your school and its immediate community. You are going to create an artistic warning sign in a form of poster that may be helpful in preventing different disaster perspectives. Use a piece of cotton band for your work. So you are going to read the first statement, and then you are going to identify the possible disasters that could possibly affect your school and, of course, your community. So your task is to create an artistic warning sign or poster that can help in preventing different disaster perspective. Is it clear, learners? Yes, that is your task. And in going, or the rubric for your task is this one. You're going to have 5 points if your work is substantial, specific, and illustrative content demonstrating strong development of ideas. You will get 4 if your work is sufficiently developed content with adequate explanation. 3, limited content with inadequate explanation. 2, minimal content. And 1, irrelevant content. So please take note of the rubric so that you're going to depend on this rubric while working on your tasks. Okay? So I'll be leaving the thought of the day found in Proverbs 3 verse 5 to 6. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your path." So in every day of our lives, let us put our trust in the Lord. And in all our ways, let us pray. Let us acknowledge Him that He is the sovereign God, and He will direct our path into His perfect will. Okay? So once again, congratulations, learners, because you did a great job in this lesson. So, I am Mr. Jeffrey A. Tamayo, and it was indeed a joyful learning. Thank you very much, and God bless us all.
Good day, Philippines. Hello, Region 1. Aloha sa Caribbean learners. Airing live from the Blue capital of the Philippines, San Carlos City. You're tuning into CCN Broadcast Center, a virtual home of every SDO-SEC learner, where passion is the key. Learning paves the way. With our division mantra, developing creativity, maximizing versatility. This is your CCN Broadcast Center. CCN Broadcast Center.